Sometimes life serves you unimaginable conflicts. Just for a second, picture being thanked for telling the truth, and realizing it cost someone their marriage. My name is Daniel, and this is my story. She thanked me like I'd done her a favor. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Not with tears or bitterness or the sharp edge I was expecting. Just sincerely. The kind of sincerity that unsettles you more than anger ever could. We were standing outside a grocery store, of all places. A space so ordinary it almost felt insulting that something like this would happen there. Automatic doors sliding open and closed. The low hum of carts rolling over concrete. A child laughing somewhere behind us. Sunlight reflected off the pavement, bright enough to make me squint. I remember thinking this moment shouldn't matter. But it did. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. Like she'd practiced those words long before she ever said them out loud. I didn't recognize her at first. Not immediately. Her face had that unsettling familiarity strangers sometimes carry, like a memory that refuses to tell you where it belongs. "I've been wanting to say that for a long time," she added. I waited. I didn't know what I was waiting for, an explanation maybe, or an accusation. For ruining my marriage. The words landed gently. That was the worst part. She didn't smile. She didn't look hurt. She didn't look relieved in the way people do when they finally release anger. She looked lighter. Like someone who'd finally set something down. My body reacted before my mind caught up. Shoulders tightening. Breath shortening. The reflexive posture of someone preparing to defend himself against a charge he didn't yet understand. "I'm sorry," I said instinctively. "I think you might have me confused with someone else." She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "You're exactly who I meant." And just like that, the memory surfaced. Her husband. Years ago. A kitchen. A question. A sentence I hadn't thought about since the day I said it. "You told him something once," she said. "Something simple. Something honest." She paused as if weighing whether she should continue. It forced him to stop lying. I wanted to interrupt her. To explain. To say it wasn't my place or my intention or my responsibility. But I didn't. Because something in her tone told me this wasn't about blame. "We've been trying for a child," she continued. "For years." Her voice stayed steady even as the words grew heavier. Doctor's appointments. Test results. Hope that learned how to whisper instead of speak. She looked past me for a moment, like she was watching a version of herself I couldn't see. Every month felt like a negotiation with disappointment. I nodded even though I didn't yet understand why she was telling me this. When the truth came out, she said, everything finally made sense. She turned back to me then. Really looked at me. "He's happy now," she said. "And that matters." The sentence didn't sound like surrender. It sounded like a conclusion. And then, before I could ask her name or say anything meaningful or even decide how I felt, she thanked me again. And walked away. I stood there long after she disappeared into the crowd, the grocery bag cutting into my fingers, replaying a conversation I'd never believed carried any weight at all. And for the first time, I wondered how many lives are quietly altered by words we never think about again. The conversation happened years earlier. Not during a fight. Not during a confession. Not during one of those moments people later point to and say, "That's when everything changed." It happened in a kitchen. A forgettable afternoon. Overcast light. The smell of coffee that had already gone cold. Her husband and I weren't close friends. We worked in the same building. Shared polite conversations. Safe topics. The kind of familiarity that never asks for too much honesty. That day he looked tired. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your posture. Your pauses. The way you stare at nothing while someone is talking to you. He stood by the counter longer than necessary, fingers resting on the edge like he needed something solid to keep him upright. Then he asked a question that didn't sound like a question. "Do you think it's better to tell the truth?" he said, "even if it destroys something good?" I remember the silence that followed. Not because it was dramatic, but because it felt like the room itself was listening. I hesitated. But not long enough. I said, "If the truth destroys it, then whatever was holding it together wasn't honesty." I said it calmly. confidently. Like a man who believed his words lived in theory, not in someone else's life. I thought I was being wise. He didn't respond. He stared at the counter like there was something written there only he could read. For a moment I thought I'd said too much. Then he asked something else. And what if there's a child involved? That stopped me. I remember a flash of irritation, not at him but at the complication. The sudden gravity. I said, then the truth will come out eventually anyway. Still calm. Still detached. Still wrong about how close the consequences were. I didn't know what he meant then. I know now. The lie wasn't that he'd had an affair. The lie was when it happened. The lie was that it was brief. The lie was that it meant nothing. The lie was that the child came after the marriage had already failed. In reality, he'd known about the child long before. He'd known while sitting across from his wife at dinner. While pretending to plan a future that no longer fit. While watching her try, again and again, to give him something her body would not allow. He stayed because he knew she loved him. Because she wanted a family. Because leaving felt cruel. And because telling the truth would force a decision neither of them wanted to make. Here's the part that haunted me later. He told me years after everything ended, that he had almost confessed before that day in the kitchen. Almost. But he didn't. Because he was afraid of destroying her hope. Because he believed silence was kinder than honesty. And because, until I spoke, no one had told him that truth delayed is still truth denied. My words didn't expose him. They didn't corner him. They gave him permission to stop pretending. Weeks later he confessed. Not in a rush. Not in panic. He told her about the affair. About the child. About the other woman. About the life he'd already started imagining, and feeling ashamed of. The marriage didn't survive the honesty. But the lie couldn't survive it either. And somewhere inside that collapse, something irreversible was set in motion. She found me again a week later. This time intentionally. She asked if we could talk. We sat on a bench in a park, the kind people pass without noticing. Late afternoon light filtered through trees. Leaves moved just enough to remind you that time doesn't stop for grief. She told me everything. Not emotionally. Not angrily. Carefully. They had tried for years. Doctors' offices became familiar. Words like probability and options replaced certainty. Hope learned how to lower its voice. She had endometriosis. Multiple surgeries. Endless waiting. Eventually a hysterectomy. No hope for having children by herself. She told me she had already known, long before the confession, that something was wrong. Not the affair. The distance. He loved me, she said. But he wasn't whole. She described how love can stay present even when commitment begins to drift. How someone can hold your hand while mentally standing somewhere else. When he finally told her the truth, she said she didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She listened. And then she asked one question. Is she pregnant? When he said yes, she felt something she didn't expect. Relief. Because the uncertainty was finally over. He wanted to be a father, she said. And I loved him enough not to make him choose between that and me. The divorce wasn't quick. There were months of anger she didn't tell me about. Nights she hated him. Mornings she hated herself for still loving him. But love, she said, doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. After the marriage ended, he married the other woman. He raises his child openly now. She sees pictures sometimes. And she lets herself smile. I didn't lose him, she said quietly. I gave him back to himself. Then she looked at me, really looked at me, and said something I wasn't prepared to hear. For a long time I hated you. The words didn't sting. They clarified. But eventually, she continued, I realized you didn't ruin my marriage. You ended something that was surviving, not living. I went home that day changed. Because I understood something that still unsettles me. We think love means holding on. Sometimes, love is knowing when to step aside. And sometimes the smallest truths carry the heaviest consequences. This is Story Vault. Every story has a key. And here we find it. In Daniel's story, the key was this. Love isn't always proven by staying but by choosing someone's happiness. Even when it breaks your own heart. Thank you for unlocking the vault with us. See you in the next story.